Welcome to Programmable World, a podcast all about tech ventures, the stories behind them, and the wisdom gleaned from lessons learned. My name is Dan Ilett. I'm an ex-tech journalist, and today I help tech companies to go to market, raise their commercial value, and win more business. I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world on storytelling, brand, launches, and sales, having launched a few of my own tech companies as well. I love hearing people's stories about how they contributed to their ventures and what they learned on the way. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a business leader, or interested in technology, Programmable World will ignite some sparks and get you thinking about what's possible. Hello and welcome to another episode of Programmable World. My name is Dan Ilett, and today I'm joined by Michael Winterson, the MD of Equinix and the chair of the European Data Center Association. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that.
So first of all, some people won't have heard of Equinix. They won't know what Equinix does. Could you just explain a bit about what you do and sort of what Equinix does as well?
Yeah, what I do. So I'm actually an American that got lost in London about 33 years ago, getting involved in tech startups. And I was involved in quite a few different tech startups back in the 1990s, culminating in launching a data center business at the beginning of the new millennium. And today people know what a data center business is. I can tell you that most of my friends, my wife and my children didn't know what a data center was until I think one day one of my kids' Blackberries went down and there was a data center that was down in Slough. And I said, "Dad, is this your fault?"
What is a data center fundamentally?
Data center. So Equinix runs and operates data centers around the world. A data center has two key functions. A data center is a place where servers and storage live and run in a most ideal environment for a server. It's secure, it's stable, energy is perfect, air conditioning is perfect. So servers and storage are happy as Larry. But the most important thing is storage and data means nothing if you can't trade it. And so you also have all the major global networks interconnecting into these data centers so that you can actually trade data between customers.
So let's just break this down. So for the average person who doesn't know much about computers and computing and so on, effectively data centers, they host all this enormous compute power, enormous infrastructure, enormous network capability that large organizations tend to be, primary users of. But for an end user who's actually experiencing a service or an application or something that they're getting on their mobile phone or their computer, chances are they're going through a data center somewhere or several of them to get that service to them. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. In fact, this very podcast is probably going through a series of 5 to 20 different data centers as we speak live. And then ultimately the data will be stored in one, but the actual process of this live connectivity from my network to your network to whatever the name of the application is that we're running on, this will be multiple data centers involved in this link.
And so that capacity for compute and for delivering is enormous compared to most people's perceptions of what computing is, right? How big is Equinix on that kind of scale?
So Equinix is probably globally in the 10 to 20% market share. So we're a market leader in the data center, and there are literally hundreds of players in our space. There's probably 2 or 3 others that are around that range. And we're not a name that people are going to know. What they're going to know is they're going to know Vodafone, BT, AT&T, Amazon, Google, Spotify, Zoom. And those are all customers that use these data centers to either run a service, Zoom, or AT&T or Vodafone deliver the service over a network. That is our customer makeup. It's a bunch of service providers and a bunch of networks. But we also operate in some other interesting domains. For example, there isn't a single equity trade or foreign exchange transaction that isn't going through a data center right now. So the capital markets is entirely digitized. There is no more open outcry systems. I mean, I know whatever people see that crazy guy in the New York Stock Exchange. It's all theater. It's all happening in a data center, really.
Given the number of services that run through data centers and Equinix, particularly, I guess, how focused is the data center industry now on delivering service as opposed to just managing infrastructure, would you say?
So there's a couple classes of data center. Kind of like the way you might think of leasing versus spending a night in a hotel. And so there is a class of data center, which we call wholesale or hyperscale, where the customer basically is saying, give me the building, give me the power, and just back on. I have the teams and the skills to manage all of this myself. And that's great. There's maybe 20 customers in the world, and you can know the names. They're all the big names, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera. Below that is a set of customers that needs a bit more white glove treatment. They need people to come in and rack equipment, fix a network connection, receive a delivery, all sorts of services on top of that. And so that group, we call it co-location. I think that industry is actually about to go through a real transformation because a lot of the services the customers are asking for now are no longer physical, they're digital. How do you connect me to my cloud over here? I want it automatic. And so there's a lot of new digital services that we're having to come out with. And so for Equinix, we've announced Scott Crenshaw as the leader of a product business unit called Digital Services. I've seen our competitor, Digital Realty, has announced a digital service as well. So this is the big new service economy for the data center market.
Right. Given there are more services then coming into this economy, and there's a huge amount of demand that's coming down the line for things like Edge and Web3 and AI and so on.
Yeah.
How well do you think that you guys can service those demands? I think there was a report out the other day saying infrastructure and compute are the biggest barriers to AI, not gathering data sets anymore. It's actually global compute power. Can data centers actually deliver that right now?
Well, you're back to what's your purpose. The lots of space and power issue is not going to go away. The world has really only just begun on its digital transformation. We can talk chapter and verse about examples of where it's already happening, and then you can immediately think of 100 places where it could happen more. So I think the number of buildings and the electrical infrastructure to support these buildings, we haven't seen the end of it. The curve is still going up, up, up. But the services behind it is going to be a big challenge because fundamentally that's a new business for us and for our competition. And it takes a different sales methodology. It takes a different service orientation, and that's going to be hard.
So given the rise in the number of services required, and we're at the beginning of this journey, what do you think the public perception of data centers is right now? I mean, there's been a lot of press. There's always been press around data centers and, the negative side of things in terms of the impact on energy use, carbon, water, all sorts of sustainability topics. We don't really hear a lot about the other side of things, which is the benefits that come from it. What's the public perception of data centers right now, do you think?
The public perception is not positive because data centers are competing for land rights, renewable electricity assets, water assets against other uses of real estate. It's a difficult time as well. If houses are not as affordable as people want them to be, we're seeing things like hosepipe bans. People want to buy renewable energy, but it's very expensive. So the data center is a really easy, nameless thing that you can throw sticks and stones at. The problem is that if you look at what a data center is fundamentally doing and why it's growing, is because the benefits of digitizing any number of industries is so huge that it's an inexorable growth because there is so many ways you can apply technology to effectively save the planet. And I think this is where, unfortunately, public perception is not helped by journalism that wants to stick to a shock jock story of, oh my God, that data center is stealing all your water or all your land. The reality of it is much more subtle. A couple of journalists are looking at the gross value add of data centers. These numbers are huge. They're measured in hundreds of millions of dollars per year per site and to a local economy or to a national economy that supports it. Sometimes that's difficult because if you look at Ireland, their problem, Ireland is a regional hub for cloud. So a lot of European cloud services are based out of Ireland. Is that helping Irish citizens? Maybe not so much, although there might be some tax revenue behind that. So I don't know how you handle the issue of public perception. We have to be very sensitive to it. I don't think we should stick our head in the sand. If you looked at the tobacco industry, there's an industry that decided to stick its head in the sand and look where it ended up. And if you look at the oil industry as well in the 1970s and 80s, it took a series of really serious crises for the industry to recognize that it had to really regulate itself, become regulated, and win back the trust of the economy. So I think we have to get ahead of that, and we have to recognize that regulation is coming, and actually regulation is going to help build trust. And actually, you mentioned my other job, the European Data Center Association. Our biggest job is lobbying Brussels not to not regulate us, but to do it smart and to do it right. And so we're actively working with the European Commission on what are the laws that you should write and how should you write them to achieve the aims that you want to achieve.
It's an interesting point, actually, because until now, and still, the data center industry is largely unregulated, and different companies. In fact, you could say this across a lot of the IT sector as well. Many companies are setting their own goals. Many companies are sort of setting their own challenges and are almost interpreting the will of what they need to do as opposed to necessarily being regulated because it's a global issue that they're facing. They're setting sort of decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, targets. But some cynics might argue that that's not quite going to hit the mark for sustainability. It's not really, we're working a lot on metrics in silos. We're not really looking at bigger picture sustainability impacts per se. And we haven't really grasped what the real context and impact of operations is per se. Would you agree that we're pretty immature as an industry in terms of understanding what needs to be done?
That's a hard one. My initial reaction is to shout out, hell no. But no, because we have a public perception problem. So at a minimum, the answer is yes, because the public doesn't quite understand that you can't have edge compute. You can't have the Internet of Things. You can't have mobile internet access. You can't have an app if you don't have a data center. So we've failed to attach the necessity of a data center to all these wonderful services people want to consume. On the other hand, we are all committed to being 100% green at very short order. We're all committed to investing in efficiency targets. On the other hand, if you look at the commitments of major technology companies, and we're talking about all of them, there's a commitment to carbon neutrality. There isn't just a commitment to carbon neutrality, but a lot of us are raising money and investing in creating new renewable energy using what we call power purchase agreements. We take our own capital and invest it directly into new renewable energy. This is a major benefit to society. Not many other industries are doing what we're doing. We're also looking at water use, and we're looking at ways to reduce it rapidly. Most of us are signing up to science-based targets, which includes capturing all of your Scope 3 emissions and engaging in massive reduction in your supply chain as well. And we're committed to cutting our Scope 3 emissions by 50% by 2030. And just to put that in perspective, most of our Scope 3 emissions is the cement and the steel that goes into our building. And so we're now looking at models where we're saying, well, if we have to pay for it, we're going to be paying for it. How are we going to get carbon neutral cement? How are we going to get carbon neutral steel? And I can tell you these markets are both very small and very expensive, but we'll work on it.
Yep. When it comes to the actual operations of a data center now, things look like they've changed a significant amount over the last 2 decades. When you start to talk about things like water cooling, even better insulation, liquid cooling, and future energy usage and so on. Could you explain a bit about what the vision of sort of the next generation data center looks like?
Yeah. So first off, where we don't pat ourselves in the back enough, when I got into this industry 20 years ago, for every unit of electricity that a customer consumed to run a computer, we were naturally consuming about 1.5 supplementary units of electricity. Our obsession with design and operations, literally walking the floor, looking for where is air being blown around that doesn't need to be blown around or vice versa, but also just design efficiencies. We've reduced that 1.5 units of extra electricity down to around about 0.2 to 0.3.
Wow.
Okay. So we're into a 80+% reduction in how much energy we use to support a customer server. And that's in the space of 20 years. And I would challenge you really hard to find me another industry that has created an 80% reduction in energy resource utilization as it grew. It just hasn't happened. And so what's happened is over the past 10 years or so, the technology industry has actually multiplied its capacity by somewhere in the region of 400 to 1,000%, depending on what you're measuring. Internet access, number of users, number of data units flowing, but a big number, more than 500%. The actual electricity that's consumed by the industry has been almost flat since 2010, based off of these efficiency savings. Now, the reality is we can't get to zero. We're still going to be using 0.2. Maybe we can get to 0.1. So there is a physical limit. So the first thing you have to realize is that this industry is going to grow. Our electricity consumption is going to start going up because we can't get any more efficient. We reach the limits of physics. So that's why we're looking at things like investing in our own renewable energy generation. So instead of taking renewable energy from homes or offices, we actually pay for and invest in the energy that we need to run that digital technology. That's probably the biggest area. Areas that we're super excited about are also, we typically have to have a backup power supply in case the primary power supply goes down. That's typically been diesel generators. Well, the first thing we did is we replaced all of our diesel with vegetable oil. So we now run our diesel generators on vegetable oil. That's a process that will take a few years. Again, it's very hard to get adequate supply of the right quality to be able to do this. But with our next generation of secondary energy supply, it's probably going to be hydrogen fuel cell, especially if there is a green hydrogen market, which we're looking forward to and we're actively lobbying for. And in that sense, now all of a sudden, I have two active energy supplies, a gas, which runs my fuel cell, electricity, which comes off the electricity grid. I can now participate as not only a purchaser of energy, but I can now arbitrage the two. Now, some people think of arbitrage as profit, but what if a renewable energy grid has naturally variable supply? Well, I already normally have a very stable demand. My demand is fixed every day, 24 hours a day. So I'm actually no longer good in a renewable energy market. But if I had a secondary power supply and I could naturally move myself off, the wind stops blowing, I use a little more gas. The wind starts blowing, I take myself off the gas grid. Now I can be a participant in these grids and I can help these grids work better.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area actually in terms of grids and input-output management, smart grid particularly. It's been said for a long time that the data center is almost a really key part of the smart grid because it's such a big user and hasn't really had the ability to contribute to that. How far away are we from the reality of the smart grid? Because I know there are some rudimentary things that are in place. Some people have got things like, solar generation and there are obviously wind farms but local grids that can actually self-sustain themselves. Have you seen any examples where that's really working well?
Yeah, unfortunately, those examples are usually very, very small islands with less than 1,000 people on them. And that's not to belittle it. It's just that the complexity of a smart grid with the number of players in a smart grid at the European level is so big. It's not going to happen overnight. What is interesting is that the European Commission is looking at policies to develop a smarter grid system. So what we have to look at, and this is the risk, is we have to look at what would a smart grid possibly be like. So we're now into futurology. And how would we potentially change the design of our data center to be able to interact with this smart grid if and when it actually gets built? And any business person who listens to what I just said will go, shoot, that's risk, that's cost, that's capital. And the answer is yes. And we need to figure out how to design a data center in such a way that when this grid comes along, we're ready to integrate and to operate within a smart grid environment.
One of the concepts that's come along with sustainability, I suppose, over the years is this idea around the productivity paradox. Or in the Victorian age, there was a guy called Stanley Jevon who came up with this concept of Jevon's paradox. Where it came from was Stanley Jevon was an economist, and the government had told the energy companies to stop putting as much soot and sort of pollution into the sky and make their energy plants more efficient. And in doing so and introducing efficiency technology, they thought they would make the skies cleaner. But actually what happened was it made the problem worse. They polluted more because effectively what the energy companies did was make energy more cheaper and more abundant. And therefore people use more of the resource as opposed to less of it. And you can see that principle, being applied throughout all kinds of technology and efficiency technologies. The paperless office, even people have said, LED lighting, there's a greater number of lights being used now than there were when there was sort of, the individual light bulbs. And, even battery technology, there's more small batteries and devices that are being used to make things more efficient and so on. And I think the problem with that, it comes down to context, of not really understanding the context or the impact in the context before you actually start that task. Because my view is that there's a danger that we don't understand the context of things before we make a call to actually introduce something. Do you think with data centers, that's been realized now and people have actually sort of thought, actually we should try and think 2 or 3 steps outside of what we're doing, not just in one direction ahead?
Yeah. So as a pure capitalist, I would say, no, let Adam Smith's invisible hand work. The customers demand something, you need to deliver it. But then looking at it as, okay, as a sustainable capitalist, one of the things that the European Commission is challenging its citizenship to think about when it launched the Green Deal. Everybody knows the Green Deal says climate neutral by 2050. There's actually several bullet points. That's just the first one. One of the bullet points is economic growth decoupled from resource utilization. And to me, that's my favorite one. So what are we saying? It's, can you do more? Can you make more GDP? Can you deliver more GDP per person while using less energy and less resources? I'm actually an optimist. I think the answer is absolutely yes. And so we should continue investing in technology as long as we can prove that the digitization is fundamentally replacing some physical resource. One of the examples that I just read a couple of days ago, and if you don't mind me quoting a journal, I can tell you the name of that journal. Okay, The Economist. I'm a pretty avid economist reader because I'm an economist myself by study. Is a really interesting article about the NHS Trust in Kent. And by adopting a SaaS application, SaaS, a software cloud service, they were able to improve the utilization of their A&E beds. And in fact, they are saving the equivalent of 130 A&E beds per year due to the efficiency by this single application. So what they've done is they've meant that the beds are used more effectively. But another way of looking at it is they've reduced the amount of physical steel and foam and stuff they have to buy by 130 bed units versus applying for this SaaS application. And I'm sitting here going, that's digitization. That's where we've completely decoupled GDP growth from resource utilization. That's just one example. I can give you hundreds.
What's next for you? What's next for Equinix? So over this year, have you got a focus?
Well, me personally, inside of Equinix, sustainability is leading to regulation and transparency and reporting. And so for me personally, this is a major issue. We've never had to report, or in fact, a lot of what we do, we consider confidential. And a lot of our customers don't want to be known. They're going to be asked to report. So we have to traverse the world of unregulated to regulated. And that's not easy. And that's going to take some fundamental change in commercials, contracts, product development, what we measure, what we deliver. So there's an army of people inside of our company that are looking at this issue. And then the earlier point you raised, what are these digital services that customers are starting to demand? And so we've had to hire in, we've made some acquisitions, we've had to hire in some expertise, and we now need to retool our sales force and our marketing engine to be able to communicate about both physical service, the data center, and these new digital services that wrap around it.
Very good. Well, Michael, it's been fascinating. Is there anything you'd like to talk about before we finish today?
Yeah, I wish I didn't have a head cold. One of the funny things about exiting a COVID world, I haven't had a cold in 5 years before COVID. Obviously didn't have one with COVID, but obviously my immune system's dropped post-COVID. That's the other thing that I'm noticing is that as human beings, the post-COVID world has made so many things so normal, including this. This industry is going to be so important for the transfer of knowledge between people. There's a lot of things that one can get depressed about, and there's a lot of things you can regret, but I'm generally a massive optimist, and I love when I see technology change the way we operate.
Michael Winterson, thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks for listening to the Programmable World podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To find out more about the podcast, our guests and the topics we cover, head over to programmable.world to subscribe to our newsletter or have a look at our company at tellejo.com. That's TOLLEJO.com. Have a good day.